On Friday night, Democratic political consultant James Carville, who, full disclosure, is from Louisiana. I've known him back when he was in the Clinton administration. He was in the Clinton White House. And he was actually pretty sharp back then. And now he makes news by appearing on cable television. And frankly, he's fairly moderate. I mean, he's a Louisiana Democrat, then they're not too bad, or at least they weren't. Well, last Friday, he claimed that Christians in politics, such as House Speaker Mike Johnson, who he knows as well, represents a greater threat to America, are you ready for this, than the terrorist group al-Qaeda. Now, don't take my word for it. Here's the clip of what he said.
Mike Johnson and what he believes is one of the greatest threats we have today to the United States. I promise you, I know these people.
Well, you're talking about Christian nationalism.
Absolutely. This is a bigger threat than al-Qaeda to this country.
There's a pattern. There's a pattern to these attacks, whether it's warning of Christian nationalism or a coming theocracy. Such attacks are meant to intimidate and silence Christians, to stick their heads in the sand and not participate in the political process. Folks, we cannot let that happen. And with an election year approaching, we can only expect more of this. Joining me now to discuss this and much more is Ken Klukowski, former senior counsel in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice during the Trump administration and a former special counsel in the White House's Office of Management and Budget. He has also litigated constitutional cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ken, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great being with you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Your reaction to James Carville's comments?
This kind of absurd scaremongering from the left is what the Constitution guarantees no American needs to be concerned about. You have here a balance of two things, okay? First of all, as we heard in your previous segment, so many of the founding fathers, they weren't establishing a Christian nation. They were creating a democratic republic where a Judeo-Christian moral philosophy was a common denominator throughout the laws of this country that, sure, whether someone is an observant Christian or an observant Jewish person, the fact that they believe murder is wrong, sure, that is related to their religious faith. Go ahead.
It's a common moral currency.
That's exactly right. And in doing so, they're not creating a theocracy because those same people wrote the...
Go right ahead. My
Tony.
program.
Yes, indeed.
Explain theocracy.
Theocracy is government under religious authorities, where the religious leaders are the government leaders. That is theocracy, where you have like the Ayatollahs in Iran who say, we interpret the will of Allah, we tell you what the Quran means, we tell you what Allah wants, and those shall be the laws of this nation. That's what you have in a place like Iran. In America, under our Constitution, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, these same people who believed in a Judeo-Christian moral philosophy also put a provision in the Constitution to guarantee that the political leaders would never be able to establish an official national religion and coerce citizens to have to become part of it. That's the difference here.
By putting what in the Constitution? No religious test.
That's exactly right. And in fact, we have it in two different places in the Constitution. One is to say, in the no religious test clause, is to say that your belonging to a particular faith can never be considered a qualification for office. But then for everyone who's in private life, for everyone who never serves in a government capacity like you have, like I have, for 330 million so people who never get involved in that process, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment says that the government is never permitted to make an official religion and then force private citizens to be part of it.
But that's been turned on its head.
It was until 2022 when the Supreme Court in the Coach Kennedy case, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, got us back to basics.
In the establishment. But yes. I want to go to quoting from Bill Maher, whose show James Carville was on. I was going to use another name for him, but so here's Marr. Quote, Mike thinks God personally chooses, raises up our leaders, which is a very dangerous thought. Okay, well first off, that's point one. The Scripture speaks very clearly to that.
Yes.
I mean, Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, and he, being God, changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and acknowledge those who have understanding. Psalms 75.
Yes.
For exaltation comes neither from the east nor from the west nor from the south. God is the judge. He puts one down and exalts another. And we can go to Romans. So if you believe the Bible and you are a follower of Jesus Christ, then you do believe that God puts people in positions.
You certainly do, and again, sticking with the Old Testament on this, I mean, you're reading all through Old Testament verses in that. This is not a distinctively Christian belief. This is also a Jewish belief. Right. It is a shared theology. It's not specific to one particular faith. And how do we believe God does that? It's by moving upon the hearts and minds of voters in terms of who they vote for, that is the instrumentality that God uses for that here.
This is, and I'm going to continue on because all this will make sense. We put all these pieces together. Mike says we began as a Christian nation. We didn't. Did you miss that day in homeschool, Mike, if you don't know that the Pilgrims came here to get away from the Church of England? Well, actually, they had religious freedom in Holland. What they didn't have was a culture that was imbued with that faith that allowed their children to live in a culture that was constructed around Christian faith. That's why they came to the United States.
That's exactly right. Bill Maher is missing his history here. He evidently has not read the Mayflower Compact and did not pay attention to the early sermons as those pilgrims came to these shores, where they said that their goal was not to establish a theocracy, but it was to establish a shining city on a hill, itself a reference to Scripture. To say that we're going to try to live righteously in our hearts, in our families, in our homes, and for that to be a blessing to society.
Right. We want our children to live to grow up under our values.
That's exactly right.
Isn't that what Christians are saying today?
Right. And in fact, in doing so, the Pilgrims were getting away from a national religious establishment in the UK.
Because
so they
corrupt.
were actually rejecting the idea of theocracy when they came here. Yes.
But today, we have parents that are trying to escape the church of the secular. They're trying to escape. I mean, secularism has become a religion in this country. It's taught in the temples of our schools. And so many parents don't want their kids influenced by that. And this is where the battle line is really drawn today.
Well, in the same First Amendment that has the Establishment Clause, the very next phrase in that First Amendment also guarantees to every person in this country the free exercise of religion. And the Supreme Court has said 3 times just in the past decade that part of the free exercise of religion is the right of a parent to be able to religiously school their children. All
right. So let's move on and build on that. So I want to go to the next thing that Marr says. He says, and he goes on, I'm quoting, and we have in Article 6, which says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office. Mike has never said that you got to be a Christian. We've never said you've got to be a Christian to be in office. So who's actually applying a religious test here? It would appear that the left, who does not like someone who actually believes the Bible, are the ones that are applying a religious test, because the Constitution and its prohibition against a religious test is not voters. It's not on voters. Voters have every right to vote for a candidate based upon the moral holdings of that candidate.
Yeah, an example of what would violate the religious test clause is what the late Senator Dianne Feinstein said to Justice Amy Coney Barrett during her Supreme Court confirmation hearings, where everyone knows Justice Barrett is Catholic, and where you got that famous line that was said with this odd grammar, like it was the Jedi Master Yoda saying it, the dogma lives loudly in you. That is what a violation of the religious test clause
And
looks
that's what we're seeing increasingly from the left.
That's exactly right. The OMB director that I served under in the White House, Russ Vought.
Right.
It was a tied
Bernie
vote
Sanders.
because Bernie Sanders was saying that his evangelical Christian beliefs were unacceptable to that senator, and that's why he was voting against him.
So what we see in the hostility of the left is essentially advancing a religious test. It's the flip side of it, so that if you have religion, if you have a Christian faith, not any religion, if you have a Christian faith, you either have to hide it or suppress it in order to serve in public.
Yeah,
That's the message they're sending.
They're the ones who are violating the constitutional guarantees that every American has, both those in public life and in private life.
Do you expect this hostility that we're seeing against Mike Johnson and other prominent Christians to continue?
Sadly, I do, because it is in what we've been seeing even with the anti-Semitism over these past few weeks since the terrible terrorist attacks of October 7th by Hamas that we're seeing. And I think in that, too, makes the point that it's not Christians only. We are seeing a concerted assault on the idea of anyone holding a Judeo-Christian moral philosophy.
I mean, Jesus speaks of this in John. I mean, it's if you have a hatred toward God, you're going to have hatred toward his people.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we have seen hostility of the sort in recent years, both against Christians and now in the past few weeks against Jews that we have never seen in the history
Well,
of this
it's
nation.
been there against the Jewish people, but I think we've been talking about on this program, there's no other way to explain it but spiritual. I mean, you've got this small country the size of New Jersey that the whole world wants to hate on.
That's right. That's right.
Why? I mean, you cannot explain it any other way than it's spiritual. If you hate God, you'll hate his people.
That as you say, Israel is the size of New Jersey, and you have Jerusalem, you have Galilee, you have Bethlehem that so many of us are singing songs about during this time of the year. And yeah, I think there is a common denominator there, and we see it manifesting itself with hostility to people of Jewish faith and Jewish heritage, and also observant Christians.
People of the book. And I think that, like for using Mike as an example, because that's what we're focused on here, is that as long as Christians kind of remain backbenchers, they're okay. The left they don't like it, but they'll tolerate it. But as soon as they are advanced to a position of leadership, they lose it.
Well, they're certainly losing it now.
So your advice, I mean, you've been through the ringer, you've seen it. Your advice to Christians out there?
You have to be bold. As the scripture says, be unafraid, be not afraid. That as you say so often, we need to stand. Understand that these are not people interested in a negotiated settlement. They want to drive you out of public life. And so for the sake of your faith, for the sake of your children, for the sake of your community, we can be lovers of peace. But we're called to participate in this struggle and to take an unapologetic and loving stand for the truth.
Yeah, well said. Ken Klukowski, thanks so much for joining us.
Merry Christmas, Tony.
Merry Christmas to you as well.